privileged to have him with this evening. I kindly request Mr. Sangamesh to address the audience. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Thanks, Raj, and thanks to the entire Isaka Bangalore uh, Executive Council team for giving me an opportunity like this to connect with the cybersecurity professionals and also the Isaka members. Thanks for the opportunity, and a very good evening all. So of course, I don't need to talk about myself. Vanita has actually briefed about me. Without taking much time, I just want to get on to the session. Let, let me know if my screen is visible.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Great. So if you look at being a cybersecurity professional or information security professional, and especially the security operations team, they'll have a nightmare because they don't know when the organization will be targeted, when they'll lose their sleep, right? And it many of the attacks, when we look at it, right, it is not something that, it is because of the advanced and sophisticated tactics and techniques employed by the perpetrators. It is because of the basic hygiene that the organization has not followed, right? We heard about many breaches, including Colonial Pipeline, the WannaCry ransomware, and then many of the other attacks, state-sponsored attacks. If you look at the root cause of that is because of either not hardened systems or by the exploitation of the known vulnerabilities which have been in the system for a long time, and also the exposed credentials and not having proper control around that managing that privileged user accounts, right? And especially social engineering has become getting advanced. We might have seen in the latest breaches which has happened in Australia and New Zealand region, where the help desk person has been spammed with the multi-factor authentication, and because that person was getting annoyed and then he wanted to get rid of it, he just authorized it, and then the perpetrator was able to get into that, right? It is happening in multiple other breaches as well. I don't want to call out the name, just to make sure that, not to further damage the brand. But having said that, the attacks are inevitable, in especially in this cyber space, and especially during the early 2022, where we had seen the geopolitical situation getting worst between Russia and Ukraine. We had seen the same thing resonating on the cyber landscape as well. Not only the physical war, but also we had seen the cyber war. It has been tremendously impacting the US and the NATO countries by Russia, right? So these are notable things that you might have come across, and we wanted to take a step back in terms of, like, while the attacks are inevitable, how can we safeguard ourselves? How can we safeguard our information assets? How can we ring fence the entire infrastructure under a managed and controlled environment to make sure that we are not falling victim to such attacks? And second thing is in terms of what is the detection mechanism we have in place. Obviously, we cannot prevent any attack, but how are we protecting? If we don't have any protection controls, the next fallback option is how soon we can detect and respond to such kind of an attack, right? So that is the primary driving and accelerating factor for the security operations team in recent days. And of course, the security operations employ the technologies like SOAR, threat intelligence, to get their maturity to the next level, and getting on to the next gen, say, security operations, or what we call that as a cyber fusion center or the cyber defense center, right? So all that is fine from detection and response or protection or prevention, whatever. But how are you making sure that, like, you are not falling victim to such kind of an attack? How are you assessing yourself? What is your footprint in the cyber space, and how are you going to manage that if there is any exposure? So that is something that we are going to talk about for the next 90 to 120 minutes. And of course, like, if you have any questions, please raise a flag or put it in the Q&A session. And the discussion which are go- I mean, which I'm going to convey, uh, these are my point of views and not associated anything with respect to my organization's point of view. That the next few minutes we are going to cover in terms of understanding ASM, the security posture, and what constitutes attack surface, right? And how we ourselves can do such reconnaissance to understand, to have a baby step to understand the complete exposure of an organization, how we can step in to understand what is the exposure, and what are the tool sets that are available, how to do a reconnaissance, and what kind of things that you can do a reconnaissance and attribute that to the attack, right? And of course, like, coming to the after reconnaissance, we are going to have the findings, and the focus point is in terms of how to remediate, right? So I'll probably give touch base in terms of how to develop a remediation plan. Of course, like, we cannot have a common framework for every other organization because their risk appetite will be different. However, how to approach for the remediation is what we are going to talk about and summarizing it, right? So if you look at, I was talking about, like, the scale at which the attacks are happening, right? So this is what happens in 60 seconds. This is an outcome of the study done in 2022. So every 60 seconds or 1 minute, we are seeing there are close to 1.5 organizations falling victim to ransomware attacks. This shows the amplification of the reachability of the attackers, how much they are expanding, and compromising the organizations and compromising the systems, either with or without any modus operandi. When I say with, of course, like, for the ransomware attackers, they demand for ransom and they make sure that, like, they exfiltrate the data and demand for the ransom to threaten the organization. I mean, if they are not paying the ransom, they leak the data. But there are some threat actors, um, right? We call them as opportunistic threat actors, of the um, very amateur threat actors, where they are initiating ransom DDoS kind of attack, where they have a infrastructure which can just initiate the traffic flood, and they create a bot across a different geography and initiate the attack to a common destination to simulate and demonstrate their capability. Though they claim themselves as a well-known threat actors like Fancy Beer or Lazarus Group, but having said that, they are not they are not such kind of a nation-sponsored attackers, but they are amateur threat actors, where they have some systems under their control creating a botnet and initiating attack. That's why I said, like, with or without any modus operandi, right? So of course, like, considering the number of records that we had seen, so every 60 seconds we are seeing 5.52 records being leaked. So you can actually calculate the volume of the records and the data breach that is happening in a year, right? And we had seen a sudden spike, especially people getting targeted with the phishing attack and the marketing scams as well. So this is how we see the entire cyber threat landscape, right? And and of course, it is very important for us to understand what is exposed from the organization perspective. So I'll just start with the definition. So the attack surface management is nothing but an approach towards fingerprinting yourself from the attacker's perspective, to understand what is being exposed to the public internet, and and of course, what is available on the surface web and also on the dark web, right? So, and then attributing that to the actual threats in terms of, can the exposed information be used for orchestrating an attack, or can be used as an attack vector or the intrusion vector to get into the organization? So it spans across your credentials, your services that have been exposed, your API key, the domain, or even the fingerprinting of the documents that have been published, which is exposing the assets that you are using, the software assets that you are using in your organization, right? We'll talk about like how these things can be.
One second.
Yes,
Uh,
please.
there is something popping up on your screen. It's called a US02 webcam is sharing your screen. Is it something which you can hide? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
That
that,
should be okay. Yeah. Thank you.
so that's my
Yeah.
WebEx. Sorry, the Zoom. I joined from the browser, so you see that
No,
notification.
that's okay. Thank you. Now
Thank,
it's better.
thank you. So this is all about the attack surface management, right? So how it can benefit, right? By doing the attack surface monitoring and management. When I say ASM, the industry terminology is attack surface management, but of course, as a practitioner, we look at it as a attack surface monitoring and then management. Unless until you discover yourself in terms of what is being exposed and monitor continuously, you will not be able to manage, right? So that's why I say like attack surface monitoring and management as part of this session, right? So as part of the doing the attack surface monitoring, you'll be able to proactively identify what is exposed to the public internet, and also from the attacker perspective, what is that they can enumerate and harvest the details of the organization. If you can do that proactively, you will be able to reduce the attack surface of the organization, and also increasing the security posture, and of course like it quantifies for your enterprise risk and corresponding risk reduction. So we will talk about how it can be tagged up to your enterprise risk management framework as well in the course of time. If you look at we why we need to have this ASM in place, right? We spoke about like it gives you a comprehensive view of the organization exposure, and the purpose of this is in terms of understanding yourself, your organization, and understanding the risk that you are living with, and also tag it with your enterprise risk management to derive the risk in terms of what is your probability of getting attacked, what are the channels through which you can get attacked, and what are the technical controls that are actually failing, or considering the attack tactics and techniques, how it can evade into your controls, right? So these things are taken into consideration. And if you look at the Gartner study for the security operations as well, right? So Gartner positioned the external attack cybersecurity asset attack surface monitor management in their hype cycle, and it is still growing, which means it has not come to, it is still seeing a spike and elevation, and it has not reached the plateau stage, right? Of course, ASM is going to be adopted by the organization. At least it will be in survival for next 5 to 10 years in the industry, right? It doesn't apply only for the IT or the technology organization. It is also been adopted by every other industry, especially the energy and utilities, where they have the OT systems in place. And OT systems, as you know, we cannot patch the vulnerabilities very often. They cannot take a downtime very often to patch the vulnerabilities. Rather, they try to bring up some mitigation controls around it and reduce the attack surface, or reduce its OT environments exposure to the public internet, right? So for them to run the business, if it needs to be exposed, it is about the organization knowing it knowing it and document it, that like what has been exposed, and there needs to be a record in terms of what is my cyber footprint, right? Cyber, what is being exposed to the public internet. So that is something that Gartner emphasized on this cyber security attack surface management, right? A study by Enterprise Strategic Group by the Tech Target, you might have gone through multiple articles by Tech Target on the cybersecurity topic, articles and topics, right? So they partnered with the Enterprise Strategic Group and then did a survey across 1,000 plus participants, mix of executives and the practitioners, the consultants, and then also with the CXOs. And they came out with the study, and the study results were very interesting. In fact, only 9% of the organizations are monitoring their attack surface, right? And when I say this, it is not even at par with the rapid growth of the attacks or the new techniques and tactics employed by the attackers, right? So only 9% organization, it is very less. So that determines the maturity of the organization, right? 69% of the organizations have experienced an attack targeting an unknown, unmanaged, or poorly managed internet facing asset. So this calls for them to understand what is the exposure. And 43% of the organization spend more than 80 hours on attack surface discovery, only tackling it weekly or semi-monthly or monthly, which means they know, they get the visibility of what has been publicly exposed, but it takes at least like a fortnight or a month for them to come up with the remediation plan and to actionize it. Till that time, it is still they are still exposed, and that what we call that as a window of exposure for the attack, right? So these are being triggered in terms of multiple factors. It could be of a complex IT supply chain ecosystem, or the cloud environment, be it Azure or AWS or GCP. We had seen, even the big organizations, large organizations, they have not configured their blob storage or S3 buckets properly, which was exposing sensitive information, right? And of course, the misconfiguration and outdated software is possessing higher risk, and leaked credentials. I mean, no second thought. If it is a active and a recent credentials, then attacker gains the access to the environment very quickly. And this is most important aspect where we might even argue like, my organization has not got breached, and but I have my public profile across multiple forums, and at least like three or four such forums or sites got breached, and my credential is exposed. But if you look at most of the employees of the organization, it's a human tendency that like we set the password more or less similar to what we commonly use across, right? Because we cannot remember all the passwords. We either set the same password, or rather same password across public sites where there is no password policy being enforced. However, in the corporate environment, because the password policies have been enforced, they might slightly change a character or two, or contextualize with respect to the organization and set the password, right? Why it is important? Because when we looked at the exposed dump, we collect and we do the research on that. When we did a data analytics on that, and applied our machine learning capabilities on those exposed credentials, we were able to enumerate the pattern of the passwords that's been set by an individual. With the sample of like a 5 6 credential itself, we were able to get a sense of like what could be the password of that person for the Gmail account, for the Yahoo account, or for Zomato or Swiggy, whatnot, right? Because we were able to see the pattern, the similarity, and then what we call that as a um, what we call that in the cyber domain as a typosquatting, which is a look-alike, or typosquatting domains, right? Similarly, people have set the password in such a way, right? That's why we say like leaked credential is one of the important aspect that you need to be looking at. And sensitive data on code repositories like GitHub, it is exposing the hard-coded credentials. It exposes your if someone by mistake put the host name of the system or the IP address, and if it is a public facing, then it is introducing a huge risk to the organization. If you look at from the rest of the thing, especially remote work culture has been introducing or rather influencing most over here in the attack surface management, because now we are in this perimeter less world, right? We have been working from home for past 3 years, and especially during the pandemic, when the organizations were not even prepared. Prior to that, they were closely putting the controls within the organization. They were primarily focusing on bringing the controls within the organization environment, be it in terms of their perimeter firewall, IPS, IDS, any sandboxing solution at the gateway level, all those things, right? And even your internet traffic will be routed through your proxy. Not many organizations have adopted the cloud proxy and all. But pandemic has changed the entire thing, right? People uh, people were exposed, I would say. The organizations were not even prepared to have EDR solutions or the cloud proxy, or even don't have much control on managing the cloud, right? And also, to continue the business, they have been allowing the remote services as well, which is not properly configured. That has actually led to many security vulnerabilities and the exposure as well. And of course, like we cannot exclude the social engineering attack. There were targeted phishing, and especially on the CXOs of the organization, what we call that as a business email leak, compromise, or whaling attack. We had seen a sudden spike during this time period, right? And of course, the end of life or end of service assets are introducing um, more vulnerabilities and exposing for or expanding your attack surface. And if you look at why do we need to do the attack surface monitoring and management, I'll just take a pause here for you to read these questions, right? So if you answer yes to any of these questions, of course you need to have attack surface monitoring and management in place, because if you are not doing it, then you are putting the organization at risk, right? And why it is important, right? So I
Yes.
was speaking about.
To that,
Sorry.
Sangamesh, there are two questions.
Yes,
One
please.
of them are related to the first point. Uh, which reconciliation tools and services you use the mapping for ASM?
Yes, I'm covering as part of my slide pack. Only like I mean,
Okay.
it's not like a specific technology specific, but I'm giving you a perspective of what are all the tools that are available in open source and commercial tools that are available, and what kind of a ASM report that provides you.
Okay. And one more similar one, very
Yes,
quick. And are these statistics relevant only to Indian organization? The one which you showed in the previous slide.
it is global. It is global.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So why ASM is very important for an organization, right? We all know, like vulnerability management is one of the challenging program in the organization. When I say vulnerability management, it is vulnerability scanning is very easy, right? By the security team, they just perform the scan and give a report with thousands and millions of vulnerabilities to the remediation team, predominantly by the IT team who takes care of the patch management. But think about the organization which is not even prepared for the scale of remediating those many vulnerabilities, right? To the max, they might even have, or rather, matured organization, large organization, they might have yeah, full-fledged patch management solution like BigFix or even Qualys is now providing the patch management for the third-party softwares. But many organizations they still rely on Microsoft SCCM for the Microsoft patches, and then for the Linux, if it is a RHL, they rely on satellite, all those things, right? But think about the softwares which are not being covered by either of these solutions, right? That is what putting the organization at risk. It could be a simple compression utility or PDF reader, or it could be a database like MySQL, MongoDB, whatever, right? While we do the scanning, but if the organization doesn't have a proper in the sense a centralized patch management system in place, that puts them in a position that they expose their organization, right? And of course, like the end of life, end of service, which you cannot get rid of immediately due to a dependency and also the budget issues, all those things. These are contributing to the expansion of attack surface. We spoke about the OT environment, right? That is what I'm calling it out. Legacy assets or the end of life or the end of service, the IoT devices. While the organization is predominantly focusing on the IT assets or to some extent on OT environment, the IoT assets or the IoT devices are not even being looked at, right? Because we see like, okay, this is for some specific purpose. It could be in terms of your DVR, NVR surveillance cameras, IP-enabled cameras, or even for the large organization, they have the building management system where they control the escalators and elevators, everything. These are IoT devices. But if we take a step back and say like, okay, while I'm very well advanced in terms of adopting to the emerging technologies, I have deployed the IoT devices in my environment. But if you look at while they are adopting to it, but the next question comes, how secure it is. Are they securing it? Are they hardening it? Are they patching it? The answer is maybe, right? We had seen a massive DDoS attack, Dyn DNS attack. It was like 5 years back, if I'm not wrong, where these DVRs and NVRs have been compromised because they were using the default credentials, right? And they were compromised and they have been used as a bot to trigger the flood towards Dyn DNS, and due to that, there was an outage of 45 minutes or 75 minutes that I'm not able to recollect exactly, but it was the first distributed denial of service attack that have been demonstrated, which has crossed 1.2 TB per second traffic, right? So when we look at these things, that's where like we get a we get the thought process of, okay, these kind of things can also happen to the non-IT devices. It could be OT or IoT or IIoT devices as well, right? So that's why like it is very important for you to consider hardening these devices and securing these devices to reduce your attack surface. And of course, like human mistakes and omissions or negligence by clicking phishing link and sharing the credentials or sensitive information is again a most contributing factor. And as you know, like human is the weakest link in this cyberspace, who can be social engineered quickly, and and it can be, and the attacker can get into the organization without much effort, right? And vulnerable outdated software and then open source software, right? That is something that like we have been seeing the adoption of open source a lot in the organization. It could be in terms of some kind of a plugins in the IDEs, or it could be in terms of the stack like Elk, all those things. when we start using it, we don't actually look at in terms of the risk that it is introducing. If there are any vulnerabilities, we we might not be able to rely on the OEM, on a specific OEM for to patch that, right? It becomes more challenging when there is a 0 day like a log4j coming in, and it has been used across multiple platforms, and some of the OEMs even took a week or 10 days time to understand whether their platform is vulnerable to log4j or not, right? And then most interesting factor is every second day or third day, even after that particular 0 day patch being released, the second day or third day we had seen one more 0 day coming in. This happened now 5 0 days in sequence, right? In a span of 24 days, if I'm not wrong. So when we start looking at these things, the open source softwares and the components, it is also introducing the expanding the attack surface. Of course, rest of the thing in terms of the vendor managed attacks, and then large scale attacks on the industry also possessing, right? Like when we look at the threat landscape, right? For an organization, threat is multidimensional. One, it is coming from their competitor itself. The second is the attacks toward in their operating industry, right? And the third one is the geography that they are operating from, right? For the third one, it is very evident that, like, the geopolitical unrest situation between Ukraine and Russia has led to the attacks towards US and other NATO countries, irrespective of any organization or any industry, right? So looking at these aspects, we should be focusing predominantly on understanding our cyber footprint and how can we mitigate, or how can we strengthen our controls and enhance our process, and relook onto that the defensive strategy, and performing this attack surface monitoring on a continuous basis. When you look at this entire attack surface life cycle, it starts with asset discovery, right? When you do the reconnaissance, you do the discovery, and then inventorize and classify that in terms of like whether my crown jewels are exposed, what kind of services that have got exposed, what whose credential is exposed. If there is any intellectual property, be it a source code or something, um, where it is being used. So you inventorize and classify that with the risk severity classification, and then assign your risk assessment methodology here in terms of risk scoring, and assign the security ratings. And of course, as a best practice, perform this activity of security monitoring continuously, right? So when I say security monitoring, this applies for both in terms of understanding your attack surface, and also in strengthening your security operations to come up with new use cases for the security monitoring based on your exposed assets, or exposed information, or exposed services. You can classify, or rather I would say, you can create a reference table of these exposed services which are vulnerable and yet to remediate. Please strengthen or come up with additional set of use cases to have a focused monitoring on that, and it should be on a continuous basis. And finally, plan for the remediation, and this has to be in loop, so that, like, this is a continuous process and there is no end to it. Using these two words predominantly in previous slides, right? In terms of attack service management, which we spoke in length, there are other terminology that is coming in as a security posture. If you look at the terminology of security posture, right? Whatever is being exposed to your public internet, that determines, based on the vulnerability it is introducing, or based on the exposure, it determines your security posture of the organization, right? And if you look at what contributes for the security posture, it spans across multiple things. It could be your infrastructure, it could be the services, it could be your application headers as well. Because there are some kind of a reconnaissance that you can do by probing your web servers and looking at the packets to understand what kind of web service that is running, web server that is running, so that you can look at the attacker can look at the availability of the exploit, or even he or she can come up with their own exploit code based on the vulnerabilities in the respective services, right? By recognizing the version and the patch version as well, the version of the product or the patch version that has got installed on the, right? So there are many different aspects that contributes for deriving your security posture. If you look at is there a way that we can rely on any specific third party vendor to provide us a security posture? The answer is yes. There are many many services or many solutions that are available, namely Risk Recon, BitSight, um, and Risk Sense, Microsoft Defender, and then CrowdStrike. All these products, they also provide you the security posture for you, for the organization. In fact, Qualys has introduced something called True Risk as part of their VMDR, which provides you the cyber risk score based on the vulnerabilities alone, right? But whereas the solutions that have been provided by BitSight, Risk Recon, Risk Sense, they provide holistically by fingerprinting the services that got exposed, the data that is getting exposed, the misconfigurations, and your patching cadence, all these things, putting it together, applying the algorithm of deriving a specific security posture. That is something that you can look at it, right? And the next question that you need to ask yourself, do organizations really need to assess themselves on the cyber footprint? Of course, the answer is yes, right? If you don't want to be a victim of any attack, or you don't want to be on the news for wrong reason, of course you need to understand yourself. I mean, when I say you, it's the organization. So the organization has to understand themselves by assessing their public exposure and attributing that to the threats, and then understanding their attack surface, right? And third question that you need to ask yourself is there a need for relying on such security posture score? And answer for this is as well yes, because this determines, or rather, like I would say, this influences your cyber insurance, the organization's cyber insurance, right? Considering that the attacks and the breaches that we have been seeing, um, uh, you know, it is getting advanced, and it is ahead of the technology that we use in the organization. And some or the other day, like any organization can get breached. So, is it important for us to look at cyber insurance? The answer is yes, right? The organizations now looking at themselves as like we have our personal insurance. Organization is also looking at taking a cyber insurance from the insurer. I mean insurance organization, and and compensate for or claim for the breach that they have experienced, right? And these insurance organizations primarily depending on your public exposure, and they rely on this security posture score for deriving the insurance premium. As like this is as like we undergo the medical checkup and providing the medical checkup report to the insurance organization, which influences on the insurance premium for us, right? So the better the security posture, the lower the premium. The higher the risk or the higher the attack surface, you'll end up in paying higher premium rates for your cyber insurance, right? That's why like it is very important for the organization. If they are going for cyber insurance, we recommend to assess themselves, to understand their public exposure, understand the security posture of the organization, and and then go for the cyber insurance, so that you have the better control and hold in terms of negotiating with your insurance organization, right? And of course, is this being leveraged by the organization for any specific benefits? Of course, yes, right? This is the primary contributor to reduce your cyber risk, right? Overall, if you look at this overall enterprise risk management framework, because as part of C risk, you might have understand like the need for the risk management framework for the organization, everything, right? So cyber risk is getting tagged along with the enterprise risk management framework, and then this is one of the influencing factor for them to come up with appropriate risk identified and also derive the mitigation plan, the risk treatment plan, and then getting an understanding of the residual risk, which will help the management to either accept the risk or risk transfer as part of taking the insurance or whatever, right? So that's how it's been leveraged by the organization. And of course, this also been used by the operational team, the IT team, and the cyber team predominantly to identify the exposure and also remediate it, right? Coming to that, what constitute the attack surface, if you look at, it can be on any form. I'm not saying, this is an, I would say, based on my thinking, my view, I created this mind map in terms of what all the things that we need to predominantly look at it, right? It could be in terms of your assets, software and hardware. Some people might have asked me in terms of how software, the software which is internally being used, is possessing the risk to the organization. So the simple answer is when an organization publish some of the internally created documents as a PDF in their website, if you look at the meta information about the PDF, you will see who created that and what, with what version that has been created and when it was created. That becomes as a juicy factor for an attacker to weaponize, to send a weaponized PDF to the respective individual, making that person, because he knows the user account, he knows which software is running on that system as well for creating a PDF, and he can weaponize the PDF and send it across to that individual. By opening that, it can actually compromise the system, and attacker can have a C2 communication as well to his or her infrastructure, right? I brought this mind map predominantly thinking from the attacker's perspective, right? So if at all we have to safeguard ourselves, we cannot be wearing the ethical hacker hat or the ethical hacker mindset. We should actually step out of that shoes and looking like hacker. What I can enumerate if I have to target this organization, what is that I need to be looking for? How, what are the things that I can do a reconnaissance? How I can harvest the credentials? And what all the infrastructure that is in place? So that has been my thought in terms of bringing up this this particular mind map. And of course, publicly exposed assets vulnerabilities, it could be on the services or it could be on the hardware or the platforms, whatever, right? And of course, SSL certificates. So there are many organization, if you look at, they put self-signed certificates as well on the publicly exposed assets, or sometimes even in internal critical systems, internal critical applications, right? So while they create it, they might not even follow the best practices in terms of having appropriate RSA, or rather appropriate hashing algorithm, and then encryption standard. They might, for the sake of creating it, they might lower down the encryption algorithm or the hashing algorithm, which is possessing a high risk over there. That's why SSL certificate is also important to understand your posture, and of course the domains that have been registered against the organization. there might be like tens and twenties of domain names that might have been registered by the organization, but hardly like five or seven might have been used, and they might not even enable appropriate configuration check for the domain name hijacking, which also possessing a risk for the organization when a bad guy or the threat actor hijack that particular domain and then impersonate the organization and try to compromise the end customers as well, right? And the exposed IP addresses, the ASN numbers assigned to the organization, which will be used for the fingerprinting, that would be the first point where the attacker starts the fingerprinting with, right? One of course like domain name. With the domain name capturing the registrant details, the attacker can further get into the ASN registration and look at with that registrant details what all the IPs that got registered with the organization, right? And of course cloud subscription, social media. So this is where like the important aspect that is coming in, right? Where we have, while we say like the organization is doing the brand monitoring or the brand intelligence, but of course if you look at the social media platform like Facebook, Twitter, there are many scams that are going on, which is impersonating the brand. If it could be in terms of fake job campaigns and creating a brand impact for the organization, and also to the organization it's not only a brand or a reputation impact, but also introducing a technical vulnerability over there where someone can do an impersonation with the existing or hijack the social media account and then compromise the or rather like impersonate and further gather the details of any other employee or someone else in the organization to gain access to any sensitive systems, right? And marketplace, again, be it AWS marketplace or Microsoft, or even in the dark web as well, I would say. GitHub is predominantly contributing, especially in the sensitive information of database and then the credentials, the host name, IP disclosure in the source code. And many developers, they try to they want to experiment something from their home where they cannot use their enterprise asset for some kind of R&D activities. What they do is they create a public repository on GitHub, which they don't secure it and make it public, and upload the source code, which is introducing more um, uh, risk to the organization. And of course like documents, the information or the intellectual property that has been available on surface web or dark web is again a key factor. Credential fee leakage, we spoke in length, of course, like it is not only being used as is, but also being ingested to some kind of analytics platform where they can do some kind of analytics on the passwords for the common mail IDs, and understand the pattern of the passwords, and they can easily do a dictionary of possible passwords and do a brute force against that particular user account to the organization environment. And email ID and the contact exposure, while the credential or the password is not being exposed, but this email ID exposure possessing high risk because that is being used for the spam campaign or the phishing campaign where that particular user might fall prey to such kind of a attack. VIP monitoring, especially CXOs and your board members, is very much important. What information of theirs is publicly available? Because as you know, like many of the board members, they might not even use the organization's mail address. They might have their Gmail ID or their own domain, which might not be managed, or appropriate security controls might not be there, right? It is very important for us to look at or have a focused monitoring of those users. What kind of a details that are being available, right? and especially any specific information about theirs also is very much important. And exposure services, it could be the benign services like port 80 or 443 http https, all that is fine. But what if you look at, like, telnet and ftp being open, and ftp with anonymous access is being open, that introduce, or that is one of the key elements that you need to consider for your attack surface. Typo-squatting domains, or the cyber squatting or lookalike domains, are one of the things that's been used by the bad guys, impersonating the brand and the organization and initiating a phishing campaign. And then the infrastructure, right? So it could be your video conferencing infrastructure, or it could be your exchange infrastructure, which needs to be publicly exposed. But if, let's take an example of your email infrastructure itself. While it is very much important for us to publicly expose, but think about the SMTP relay is being enabled for public IP addresses. Then me as an attacker can actually relate to that particular or use that as a SMTP gateway for my phishing email, and impersonate the internal employees that this mail has been originated internally, because that is coming from their own gateway, right? That's why, like, you need to understand the infrastructure that's publicly being exposed and the services that are running, and whether it is being configured properly. Your DNS and MX records are very much important, and so is the case with your email security. You need to have appropriate sender policy framework, DKIM and DMARC, implemented for your email security, so that you can reduce the attack surface, at least from the from the impersonation through email perspective. Once you have properly configured SPF, DKIM and DMARC, at least your attack surface on the email gateway is reduced to 95 percentage, right? So I'm leaving that 5 percentage because there are some evasion techniques that's been observed, but that's not being completely demonstrated as of now. But that is still in theory and the research. That's why I'm just parking that 5%. But having said that, with the current SPF and DKIM and DMARC capabilities, you can maximize your security configuration on your email infrastructure. And finally, like, the web services, the web servers that you are publicly exposing, it might also introduce, it can also be an attack vector, because you might be running with a vulnerable web server, right? That might also be introducing some more challenges for, rather it can be a low hanging fruit for the attacker to compromise your organization. That's why, like, as a practitioner and the as a best practice, we recommend to move those web servers behind CDN, content delivery network, so that your real assets are being protected, whereas what is being publicly exposed to the public internet the is the cached content from your content delivery network service provider, right? So this is what I could think about in terms of where the attacker can gather information and use this information as a attack vector or the vehicle to intrude into an organization. I'll probably take a pause here if you have any specific questions on this, or
Uh,
share your thoughts as well if there are any other vector that you could think of.
yes, and there are a couple of questions.
Yes, please.
Uh, okay. The first one, it's talking about, let me take it on ASM itself. Um, any inputs of attack surveys by bots?
Any inputs?
Any inputs of attack surveys by bots, like it can be multiple bots, or is it a single bot?
Yes. Okay. So when we talk about bots, right, it's a very interesting topic which we can talk even for 30-45 minutes. So there are two things: the good bots and bad bots, right? Good bots are the one that are what we call as the indexer, like Google engine. Google uses the bots. Bing uses the bots, right, to index your web page for the search results and other things. Those are good bots. The bad bots, which are actually being leveraged by the bad guys to orchestrate the attack. So you can understand based on the packet analysis. If you look at the traffic that have been initiated by these bots, you can easily figure out based on the packet headers. Okay, say suppose if there's a there's a botnet which is initiating a attack towards a web server, right, on port 80 or port 443 or whatever. If you look at that particular traffic, when you access manually from your browser, which is a benign traffic, that will have a user agent string that will say like Mozilla IE some version, all those things. Whereas the traffic initiated by these bots will have a different user agent string. That way you can actually identify the bot network traffic and classify that as a malicious. So the DDoS platform, sorry, DDoS protection platforms, which have been offered by Cloudflare or Radware, all those things, this is one of the mechanism they understand in terms of looking at the traffic and classify whether it is a benign traffic, then it will route it to the server. If it is the botnet or the DDoS attack or the attack probe, it will route those traffic towards the scrubbing center. Hope I'm able to answer your question.
Yes, and thank you. It is very detailed. As you rightly mentioned that you can speak about this for more. But there are three more questions related to this. What are the typical challenge in mapping attack surveys for cloud?
Mapping attack service.
No, attack surface for cloud.
Surface for cloud. Okay, see, I can call out with an example. Okay, in fact, like that particular organization is one of the top 5 service provider in technology. Um, I can quote two examples for that to answer your question, right? So one example is like a MNC which exposed uh, their customer configuration, the credentials, and some sensitive information in their Amazon S3 bucket because they have misconfigured, or rather they have not configured to authenticate and access the information. They have not brought the authentication control over there. That is on the cloud itself, right? And the second example, again, one of the top 5 IT services organization, MNC as well, they also have exposed their internal details on they have put up on the cloud and got it exposed. Here it is not the credentials or something, but it is actually the source code of some of their products, right? So these two things actually trigger us. How can the organization can be looked at? Why it is coming now, which was not in the traditional days? Because in the traditional days we have been putting everything in our data center and putting all possible controls, and we were able to manage that. But now when it has been moving to the cloud, any other employee can spin off or get the subscription on Azure or Google or AWS and move the data over there. And they might not even be aware about enforcing security controls to secure it, right? So that way it is introducing more risk and expanding the attack surface when you're moving to the cloud. Hope I'm
Okay.
able to answer your question.
Yes, thank you. One more question. After that, we will move to the next slide.
Yes, please.
Are penetration testing tools being used widely in Indian organization? That's question. How effective are these for mapping the ASM?
It's a great question because I think this is the third time that I'm hearing the same question, like what is the difference between penetration testing and ASM, and the tools that you use in PT is also being used here, right? It's a great question. Thanks for asking it. So if you look at the penetration testing, they also do the reconnaissance, right? And I would say like the tools that have been used in penetration testing, be it in terms of the open source like Metasploit or Recon NG, or even for that matter the Kali Linux, the entire open source pen testing tools have been made available on Kali Linux itself. That's been widely been used. Right now, the adoption in India, of course, yes, we use Kali Linux predominantly because that gives a free hand for the pen testers to, compromise or try to use the exploit code and compromise it, or at least, use multiple tools within a common framework and target. I mean, do the testing against the target environment, right? And if you look at the pen testing industry, where it is going, there's something called automated pen testing. That's why like the machine learning and artificial intelligence are being introduced onto this particular space, where we just need to invoke the engine, provide the environment details, and that will have an intelligence based on the reconnaissance. It actually takes the appropriate exploit and then orchestrate the attack to and come out with the findings as well, right? That's what the industry is going on, where there are some products, some OEMs are providing automated pen testing capabilities, but the research on this pen testing space is heading on to the red teaming, right? So pen testing, again, it's bound to specific rules of engagement, I would say. Whereas from the red teaming perspective, the person will be empowered to compromise the environment, given a free hand to use whatever the tools that they want to use, and get into the organization in whatever the channel that they wanted to, right? And of course, red teaming is another interesting topic. We can speak about that for longer time. But the industry is looking at red teaming and also purple teaming, where they get the most benefit out of it, right? The purple team is nothing but the engagement of a red team, and the blue team. Blue team is predominantly your security operations team, where they gain the visibility of the attacks, threats that are happening and monitoring that and doing an incident response. So the partnership between this red teaming and blue teaming, which is what we call as a purple team, is actually yielding much more better results for the organization.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
we will move on. Yeah.
So to continue with like what we had seen as part of like what are the things that you can consider or what constitutes the attack surface. I just want to put it together in terms of like why those things have been collected, right? Especially from the IP address perspective, it can be used for the various lookups, and then looking at the indexing engines like Shodan and other utilities, right? And email, as I explained, it is being leveraged for initiating phishing campaign or spamming with the marketing mails or something like that.
Okay,
Uh,
Sangamesh, 1 second.
yes, please.
Some people are mentioning about they can't see the screen. Uh, can you just share the screen once again?
Yes, I will do.
Yeah.
Is it visible?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
One minute, let me bring it up onto slideshow mode.
Yeah. That's one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Thank you.
looking at different category of the things that we collect, all right? It, I mean, I just put it in place in terms of like what are we doing about it, in terms of collecting the email information. The attacker can initiate a spamming campaign or a phishing campaign or some marketing campaign, and exposed credentials that is being used for brute forcing against the organization environment. And of course, forget about the organization, also for your personal accounts as well, right? Like, if we all know about, like, Yahoo and LinkedIn got breached in past, and that those credentials were made put up for sale in the initial couple of years, and then after that it has been made public. And if you look at many mail IDs that we had seen, the attacks have been originated, or rather, attacks have been orchestrated towards those mail account, though it has been on LinkedIn credentials with the subscribed mail ID. People were trying to attempt to gain access to those personal mail accounts as well with that exposed credentials, right? That's how it's been used. That's why it's exposed credentials are possessing high risk. And especially when you are having the hard coded credentials on your source code, which is on Bitbucket or GitHub, it is introducing more risk, because the if we are able to enumerate, so as the case with the bad guys as well, and they will be able to orchestrate the attack by leveraging those exposed credentials. Domain enumeration, as I said, like, there might be multiple domains. There are two aspects again to this. One, in terms of like a misconfigured domain security, DNS security, which will allow the bad guys to enumerate the domain and do a domain hijacking. And second, in terms of lookalike, right? And that will be initiated for the phishing campaign. And the third aspect is in terms of the dormant domain. You might be owning some domain which, if you are not even using it, someone might, after hijacking it, they might host something else, and impersonating the brand. So it is very much important for you to do the domain enumeration and understand what services are running, whether it has been active, and appropriate DNS security controls and the configurations have been imposed onto it, right? Tech stack enumeration, again, to profile the organizations based on favicon or TLS certificate. Certificate also reveal a lot of information, because when you create a SSL certificate, it will be bound to a system or the domain name, all those things. Some organization, they'll create a wildcard certificate, and sometimes it is for the IPs as well. That exposes your internal IP address, and by profiling all those things, a bad guy can actually come out with your organization's network architecture itself. Not 100%, but at least with the available information, to some extent, that person will be able to come out with the architecture of your organization, right? And the general enumeration on social media, images, VIP monitoring, paste bin. Paste bin is again important aspect, where it is not bound only to the source code or exposed credentials, but also some of the documentation as well, right? That is possessing more risk over here. That is something that you need to look at. And this is your recon approach, right? How we approach this entire attack surface monitoring, and of course management. I'll keep it aside for now, because managing is a broader topic. But at least, how do you monitor your attack surface? It is by doing a public reconnaissance. I'll talk about the tools in the later slides. So you profile your organization, you understand your organization's footprint on the cyber landscape, and then look at the threats, attribute to it. Like, when you understand your organization, you need to think broader in terms of which industry is what. I mean, whether the organization is part of some specific industry, and then start profiling in terms of the attacks for that respective industry, and then who are all the threat actors who are targeting this industry, right? And then start profiling your organization's cyber footprint and understand what is the exposure across different things that we discussed in previous couple of slides. And then look at the threats that you are exposed to and extract the TTPs. To have it very simple, right? You can leverage the Mitre attack framework for looking at the tactics and techniques that have been leveraged by the bad guys, and then start mapping to it to understand whether you have your controls defending against such kind of tactics and techniques. It's not only about the controls but also your processes as well, right? So say suppose if there is a privilege escalation as one of the technique that's been used by the bad guys as part of their malware payload, do you have appropriate control? It could be your EDR or EPP having the ability to detect that privilege escalation attempt, right? And it also applies for your other TTPs as well. It could be lateral movement, or it could be in terms of uh, you know session hijacking, whatever, right? So you need to analyze your organization's exposure, and then the TTPs that are there, the attacks that the industry is experiencing, and with the exposure findings, superimpose the threat information on top of your exposure data, and derive the actual risk that you are living with, right? And that is what I call that as a report and recommendations, right? As I was saying in the initial beginning of this session, that tag this along with your enterprise risk management framework, so that you know the actual risk from a public exposure perspective, what is that you're living with, and then come up with the mitigation and the RTPs, so that you try to reduce the risk. And even if there are any residual risk, you take a call in terms of either risk acceptance, risk transfer, or risk avoid, whatever, right? So that's all about from the management perspective, but predominantly from the monitoring perspective, you apply this simple approach. You apply this simple approach in terms of understanding yourself, understanding the threats that you are living with, and gather the information, understand the techniques and tactics that have been deployed or employed by the bad guys, superimpose on top of your results, analyze it, and come out with your recommendation. I'll just take a pause, because this is a very important aspect of your entire attack surface management strategy, I would say. If there are any questions on this.
Yes. Um, okay. Well, one that is there are some people facing some bandwidth issue. That's yeah, please re-log in, and screen not visible for some people, but many of them it's okay. We just address that way. The question is, what is your take on XDR versus EDR, and how best EDR can help in ASM?
Yeah, I would say like this is also a great question, because people get confused with EDR and XDR, right? Uh, Endpoint detection and response, and then extended detection and response. If you look at the entire story of the XDR, every OEM now the industry is looking at is slightly different, I would say. EDR is very straightforward, where it has the ability to detect the threats based on multiple factors. It could be with the traditional way of detection with the signature based, what we call that as an endpoint protection platform. So the signature based detection, and then the second one is heuristic analysis, right? So one is the third one is behavioral analysis. So behavioral analysis and heuristic analysis is something that that's the secret sauce of the endpoint detection and response EDL solutions. It could be CrowdStrike or Defender or Bitnine, Carbon Black, whatnot, right? FireEye of the world. So this is the secret sauce in terms of how do they detect advanced threats, right? It is predominantly based on your behavioral analysis and heuristic analysis. But what if something, or rather, I would say like some of the matured ADR, they also look at a couple of other things, right? I would say three things. The one of the first one is the intel based, right? The reputation lookup. Second one is reputation lookup. So when I say reputation lookup, as we know, like when we get an IP address, we instead of we doing further analysis, we directly go to virus total or AnyRun or wherever, and then just put that particular IP or put that hash value to get the reputation of that particular threat indicator, right? So those are things have been brought up within the EDR itself as like, one is a reputation check, the second one is intelligence driven, right? Threat intel correlation, I would say. That's where like FireEye and CrowdStrike and Defender of the world, they have their own threat cloud where they have all this information, and when they are not able to take a decision by the agent in terms of they don't have the signature, heuristic analysis not giving much information whether it is suspicious or malicious, and so as the case with not exhibiting any malicious behavior, then it falls back to intel based correlation, right? So that's where like reputation check and intel driven thing is predominantly used by this organization. And the next approach is sandboxing. And of course, like these are tightly packed together to get a holistic approach of classifying a file is whether malicious or suspicious. This is the EDR approach, right? XDR takes this into the next generation, I would say, by collecting multiple telemetries from the system itself, right, from the endpoints, and also from the intelligence aspect, and also the TTP correlation. That's where like I say like this XDR is taking the existing EDR to the next level. So it is predominantly driven by multiple telemetries collected by the XDR agent, correlation with the intelligence, and also the incident data, contextualizing with the intelligence, attributing multiple factors, and providing a holistic approach. That's what XDR is all about. And how it actually contributing to ASM is we can bring this ASM, the contextual information, to the incident response. When we see some exposed services and we see some of the attacks coming in, basically the indicator of attack and indicator of behavior, that's where like this ASM findings will be more useful, helpful to contextualize that alert, and invoke appropriate incident response playbook and containment actions.
Okay, it's a very elaborative response.
Yeah.
Thank you. And there is two more out of the box questions. Um,
Yeah.
is it really possible to patch or upgrade OT system like IT in terms of frequency?
So I would say like it's a diplomatic answer. I'd say
Yeah.
because it depends on organization's maturity. Okay, some organizations they have a zero tolerance in terms of the patch management, patch deployment, I would say, right? But some organizations they have to live with some of the vulnerabilities because of some functionalities. Let me take a classic example. Some of the web applications that have been in existence for past 5 years or 7 years, which have been developed in JDK 1.6 or 1.7, whatever the version, right? So you cannot directly apply the Java patches or upgrade to the latest version now if it is in production and there is no migration being planned with the latest stack, right? So if you look at those things, they are living with the risk. They cannot patch it. They have to live with those vulnerabilities. So that's why I would say like it's a bit diplomatic answer where the organization takes a conscious decision of whether to have a zero tolerance policy for the patch management, or is it something the risk management or the business impact takes the precedence, or the business continuity, not the impact, business continuity takes the precedence, and live with the vulnerabilities by having some mitigation controls, right? It could be like a virtual patching, or it could be moving the asset behind a CDN, all those things, right?
Okay. A last pending question. Uh,
Yes.
how important or crucial does building a SOAR and a CM process reduce the risk of exposure?
Okay, so this again a great question. Thanks for asking. See, when you find the attack surface monitoring findings, right? There's some finding. There's a service, or rather, I would say, like, there is a FTP running and with, um, anonymous login enabled, all those things coming as part of your ASM report, right? Your SOAR, you can actually integrate that with your ASM findings to orchestrate, to trigger a ticket to the appropriate team, alerting them that this is what it is. And if you have the integration established to the respective control, you can actually do the configuration change to disable the anonymous login if FTP is required. Otherwise, you can turn off the service itself, right? FTP service itself. So that way, your orchestration engine as part of the SOAR can be leveraged for remediating these ASM findings. And of course, you had asked for the SIM perspective. For the SIM, in the security operations, it can provide the contextual information. When I see an attack on a specific asset on FTP, right? This the security operations team will be looking at the firewall traffic where I see there's a huge traffic coming in towards a FTP server. But your ASM findings will help contextualizing, okay, there is a FTP server and there is an anonymous login also being enabled on that. That's the context that brings to elevate the severity of that particular, I would say the security monitoring use case. Hope I'm able to articulate.
Yes, and some of them it's already mentioned. Very well answered XTR question. And thank you. And we will continue. And yeah, please.
Thank you. So if you look at, like, what should be looking at, we spoke about different components, or what is that, like, we look at from the attack surface monitoring. You can do the reconnaissance, right? But look at from the attacker's perspective. We are actually, we have looked at in the previous slides from the ethical hacker perspective, or from the organization perspective, or defender perspective, whatever you call. But let's get on to the attacker's perspective, right? What they actually look at, how do they look at these exposed services or exposed information for their attacks? These are the things that they look at for, especially on the public facing assets. They'll be looking at what service is running and what version of the service that is running, and also mapping that with the known vulnerabilities, and then looking at the admin consoles, right? So interestingly, like, one of the uh, major breach that has happened is due to the publicly exposed Apache HTTP page, sorry, Apache Tomcat page with default credentials, which is, and the older version had Tomcat as the username and admin, and Tomcat as the username and password. So with that, like, attacker was able to enumerate the domain, and then which had he was able to access the admin console, get into that, and was able to compromise, right? So this is what, like, the attacker's perspective, how they use it, what they look at it, right? So external facing assets, infrastructure, the services, credentials, and then also on the DNS records and the subdomains. These are for, host name discovery, that to understand the pattern, what naming convention that's been used, so that they can use it, and then impersonate the system as well. Um, which are all the entry points for getting into the organization network? It could be a VPN gateway, which is SSL VPN, or it could be into any of the internal applications, whatever. And then admin interfaces. This is what I was calling out with an example. Inquiries and search functions within their organization website, and then API. Right? API is again an interesting factor where, like, people talk about, like, running the business, integration with different websites, domains, everything through API, all those things. But what they do is they don't apply the key management principles, the basics of key management principles to this API key. Either they get it exposed in the GitHub repository, or they don't rotate, or they don't expire the uh, unwanted API keys, which is allowing the attackers to get inside the organization. And the last not but not the least is like interfaces with other application and system. This again through the API, right? And this is an indicative list. What I'm talking about, right? So it can be broader based on whatever the ASM results that are coming out with. They can weaponize based on the findings and orchestrate the attack, right? So overall, from the reconnaissance outcome perspective, what it results into, again coming back to the uh, PyTAT perspective. So this ASM reconnaissance will provide you the ASM overall provide you the visibility of your organization's digital footprint, and also providing you an opportunity before the bad guy takes that opportunity, providing you an opportunity to address those findings. And this also address the risk created by the shadow IT and the shadow data and misconfigured cloud services. And this helps you to enforce the password change for the exposed credentials, and also create awareness with your employees on such exposed credentials, and not to reuse the same credentials for the corporate access, and also securing their personal profile as well, right? And this also influence in terms of giving a feedback for re-looking onto your hardening guidelines to harden the systems and enforce some of the security best practices for your assets. It could be systems or the network devices or the applications, whatever. And of course, knowing what information is being kept for the organizations for various services that index the entire internet, right? So if possible, see if something that you host which should not be indexed by the search engines, please make use of robots.txt, and then start limiting those, or rather hiding that from the search engine to index the information published on that particular domain or website, right? So there are some multiple best practices that you can adopt to come out with, or rather providing the input for your remediation and enhancing your security program itself as a whole, by hardening the systems, by implementing the best practices, by re-looking onto your change management as well. There might be some dormant systems publicly exposed as well. Probably IT guy who might be exposing some systems for a testing purpose, and he might not even revoke it back. That might be exposed and introducing a risk, right? So that's why it is very important for the organizations to invest on this attack surface monitoring and management, and these are the outcomes that they can see, right? And this is about doing the reconnaissance. Like in the beginning of the call, you had asked for the tools of doing the ASM. So I mean, this is again an indicative list, I would say. The first six are of predominantly open source, and then the second half of the slide is predominantly a commercial one. And this is nothing to promote these brands, but what I'm saying is like these are the things, especially on the open source things, that I'll be predominantly using to get a comprehensive ASM report of an organization, right? As a practitioner. So Spiderfoot is actually, I would say, a Swiss Army knife for a person who's doing a ASM. You have 200 plus specific controls to look at it, and instead of you looking at the domain tools individually, Maltigo, Shodan, what you can do is you can have your subscriptions over there and put the API key onto the Spiderfoot plugin. It is modular in nature. You can enable or disable specific plugins, configure the plugins for which you have the subscription, be it commercial subscription or free subscription. Once you run this particular ASM, the once you start this scan itself, it fingerprints your attack surface and categorized into multiple things. It could be in terms of your software assets, hardware assets, services, credentials, and then documentation, source code repository, everything, right? So I would recommend to use Spiderfoot, in the sense, like my personal experience, I have seen a comprehensive coverage. But having said that, I don't limit it only with Spiderfoot. I use Maltigo, Shodan, domain tools, and Metasploit as well. And Google Docs, again, if you are familiar with Google Docs usage in the search engine, you would be able to enumerate a lot, right? So that's up to your intelligence, I would say. It is not about the knowledge, about your intelligence, how you use the Google Docs to get appropriate information about the organization on its exposure. Having said that, these are predominantly looking at the attack surface, or rather, like footprint in the public internet, not on the dark web. But for dark web, probably you might have to take a different commercial service. With respect to the commercial tools, ASM, I mean, Palo Alto is providing ASM as a service as part of Cortex Expanse platform. Bitsight, they started with the security posture rating, third-party risk management platform, and then they are now getting into ASM space. Risk Sense, Risk Recon is similar like a Bitsight platform. And CrowdStrike, again, they come out with the ASM based on their telemetry that they see, based on their fingerprinting, EDR footprint, and also the vulnerability intelligence that they have. And Microsoft Defender, again, with respect to their platform, they provide the ASM view of your organization. Right? And I mean, all this while, like we have been talking about, like, what can we look at, how we can look at, and all. So what next, right? That is about your remediation plan, and you cannot remediate. I would say, like, if anyone says like I'll remediate all the findings, um, anyone can challenge them, because you cannot limit your attack surface with certain things. You cannot say, like, the organization is 100%, though they are publicly exposed, but 100% secured, right? That's why I say, like, it is very much important for you to come out with the risk remediation plan, what to prioritize. And the best approach is, in terms of, as I was explaining in the previous slides, apply MITRE ATT&CK framework on top of the findings and look at the risk the organization is living with, right? And map that to your threat landscape, understand the threats, and then start prioritizing your remediation actions to those findings. It could be in terms of different areas. It could be in terms of infosec, like a firewall, web gateway, email gateway, whatever, and then cloud services, on identity and access management, data security perspective, or the DLP, security operations, tagging that with the governance, risk, and compliance, basically the risk management, the risk assessment that you had done, and of course, in terms of the vulnerability management as well, right? And some of the mature organization, they also do the internal ASM, but predominantly they term that as a red teaming exercise. Okay, but what we have seen so far is from the outside in view perspective, what is publicly exposed. But the similar thought process has been adopted by many organizations. Some, they call them as a internal attack surface monitoring. Some organization, they call that program as a red teaming, right? They do these things, putting both internal and external exposure put together, creating a 360-degree view of what has been exposed, and come out with the remediation plan and then manage. So it is important for an organizations to come out with some kind of a metrics on this, because what you cannot define you cannot measure, and what you cannot measure you cannot manage, right? So whatever the technology, the controls that we speak in the uh, cyber security domain, all it leads to a single point, which is cyber risk. Okay, whatever we are doing, whatever the controls that we bring in, whatever the process that we bring in, it is to understand the cyber risk of the organization and how it can be managed. So the cybersecurity program is all about that, right? And how you can, I mean, some of the, I would say, like my perspective of the influencing factors for your remediation plan is take a risk-based approach for the remediation, right? One, in consideration of business impact versus threat likelihood based on the asset exposure, right? And second one, how relevant is that finding is for the current threat landscape, and you can even put it in the heat map in terms of coming out with uh, uh, you know um, the threat likelihood and exploitability uh, uh, heat map, I mean, on either axis, and then short mapping the findings to put it together to come out with the remediation prioritization. And third one is in terms of integration with security operations for detection and response, which is predominantly reactive, and getting in the integration to your security testing, that's more proactive, right? So, I was actually talking about, there was a question in terms of how this ASM is complementing the security operations, SIM and SOAR. That is what I mentioned in the third point, which is integration with the security operations for the detection and response and security testing. Well, I mean, the integration touch points can also be to your CMDB or to your ITSM tool. This is to get the maximum benefit of your ASM findings, right? So when you have the findings to contextualize, you have the integration to your CMDB or asset management tools so that the asset context will be built in, and then to your ITSM tool to track the life cycle of the detected vulnerability or the finding, so that it follows the your defined process for your vulnerability management, and also raise the ticket with appropriate resolver group or the remediation team to remediate those findings. And also integration with your vulnerability management tools like Qualys, Tenable, or Rapid7 or whatever, for updating the asset inventory and vulnerability discovery. So when you look at these scanning tools, we actually provide the IP address and do the scan. Probably we might not do or import the entire IP range, right? So it might also be, I would say, like there might be a gap where some asset will be there in the environment, but you might not even scan that. So integration that with your vulnerability management tools will give a feedback mechanism to incorporate as part of their regular scanning, and find the vulnerability and remediate it, right? And then of course the SOAR and security operations tools we spoke in length, right? I'll take a pause here. We are almost in the end of the session. I'll take a pause here if you have any questions in remediation plan or any topics that we had covered so far.
Yes, there are two questions. And okay, the first one, using such online tools itself may be a huge risk. So, how we can be assured that this reconciliation, recon data is not leaked?
Okay, so if I understand your question, like usage, like using the public platform or the open source is at
Correct.
risk, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Some of the platforms that we use, which might possess risk, but we should actually be looking at the other aspect of, if it is been available to us, it is also been available to the hacker, right? It is all about who is actually coming or detecting it fast and then invoking the remediation plan, right? Either we as a defender finding it and then immediately remediating it, or the attacker finding it first and exploiting it, right? it is it is, I would say, like the Tom and Jerry game, right? So who picks it first? So irrespective of the risk that is been there by the usage of these open source or rather like public portals, it is up to the organization how soon they can remediate. That should be the driving factor.
Okay. There is one more question, not related to this. Extracting TTPS is really challenging and difficult to cover all TTPS. How do we handle this? Are there any templates available for mapping all TTPs?
Yeah. So you can visit the Mitre attack framework, mitre.org, cve.mitre.org, or even mitre.org. You can visit there. That is the common framework for all tactics, techniques, and procedures that have been used by the threats. That's again kind of getting it's a kind of a crowdsourcing kind of thing. It's an open source, but that is one source of truth that you can rely on to get a comprehensive view of what kind of a tactics and techniques and procedures are used by the threat actors, and also mapping that to the specific threat actor. If it is APT28, what are all the TTPs that they use? So that way you would be able to get a complete understanding of TTPs. You can also download a copy of that in an Excel sheet or a JSON file to offline map that with your detection use case, and then understand how many TTPs that you are covering, your control is covering, right? And there is something called attack navigator within Mitre attack thing. You can have a Google search. That's why like it actually provides a view to directly edit it there as well, or you can download an offline copy where you can look at your controls and then mark every tactics and techniques how much you are covered. Either you don't have the detection mechanism, or you have a partial detection, or complete detection mechanism in place. That way you will be able to understand your threat exposure, not the attack exposure. It's a threat exposure of the organization to such kind to the advanced attacks and the threats. It could be ransomware, denial of service, or botnet attack, phishing, whatever. Right? Everything has been covered as part of the Mitre attack framework.
Uh, okay. I'll take 1 more minute or 2 minutes for extra. I'm sharing my screen.
Yes,
Uh,
please.
okay, 1 second. Yeah, this is for the whole the members. Um, as you know that this Isaka Bangalore chapter is one of the largest chapter in India, and still continuing with the number 1 position, and with the help from all of you, and to continuously and enhancing our membership numbers. This is nearly to 2,000, and we are still growing. As Raj mentioned that, yes, and we are tying up with some of the institutions to enable the free, to provide the free options available from Isaga worldwide. And with that, we are still growing. And I request all of you to support the Bangalore chapter to further enhance or increase the membership. And please join and participate. And now, as part of our continuous supports to the community, and we are conducting now the series classes, which is going to start from 27th May. That is next week. That is followed by 28th, 3rd June, and 4th June. And if somebody, you can share this with your colleagues. And if some of your organizations are willing, and you can share with them. And this will be an individual, and they can come and join for Isaka Bangalore. And the second one, you can see that we are starting CDPSC. That is from 10th June, and that is for 3 classes. And then followed by CGIT, then SISM in July. And we request all of you just to share this with your non-people to increase membership. And that will really help the students to pass their examination. That's one. And I know okay. Sangamesh, do you have more slide to present?
I have one slide to
Yes,
summarize and close the session.
correct.
Rajesh.
Then I'm just stop sharing and you can share that.
Sure. Yeah. So just to summarize, like it is a need of the hour for the current cyber landscape, I would say, and it is very much important to understand the exposure, the attack surface, the threats that the organization is exposed to, and the and if we do the basics right by practicing cyber hygiene, that reduces the entire attack surface, right? It could be in terms of your the hardening the systems, and it could be in terms of creating a awareness to your employees in terms of not to uh, give official ID in the public forums, or subscribe to any services with the official IDs unless until it is required, and also usage of the passwords and password rotation, using the vault for managing multiple passwords, using the password complexity mechanism, all those things, right? So if we practice the basic cyber hygiene, that itself is actually going to reduce the attack surface. And the security posture score, it is influencing cyber insurance of the organization. And security posture score is influenced by the attack surface, right? And that's why, like for an organization, the mature organization, when they go for in cyber insurance, it is very much important for them to assess themselves, so that they can negotiate with the insurance organization. Otherwise, insurance organizations are now relying on some of the commercial solutions to understand the public exposure of an organization through this security posture score, and then they are negotiating with the organization for increasing the premium. Okay, that is what happening, because it's actually a business, right? Anything can happen. And of course, to start with, it is recommended the organization can leverage the open source tools to understand their exposure before they actually subscribe to any commercial solutions. So that concludes my session. In fact, a message to everyone: be vigilant of the threat, risk, everything. Be aware of the security policies, the threats that are there. Don't fall prey and regret later. Keep yourself updated on the cyber threats. Be secure, be aware, and be security aware. Thank you.
Yes. Before I hand over to Vijay, a couple of comments. First of all, let me share my screen. Um, okay. Um, Thank you and everyone. It was a fantastic session, and that's what we generally say, that now you hear from the horse mouth, and you heard everything from the captains or the industry scans of the people who manage the attacks, and that's what. And even I was just so attentive, it was coming from a so well experienced the captain saying that this is what it happens, this is the way it is happening, and this is the way you need to protect your information data, your infrastructure. Sankamesh, it was one of the fantastic session which we had in 2023, and thank you for your time and efforts to make it happen. And rest Vijaya will cover on this, and the team, and please use this www.mendi.com and use the code 32470960, and provide your feedback, and your feedback will help us to improve our session and provide more different topics for the future. Thank you everyone on joining on a Saturday, and for Sangamesh, fantastic 90 to 1 hour 20 minutes. Thank you. BJ, back to you.
We are on gun time. Yep. Okay, so it's my privilege to wrap up and propose the vote of thanks for today's CP of ISACA Bangalore chapter themed Managing the Attack Surface. At the outset, I would like to express my profound gratitude to our speaker, Mr. Sangamesh, for sparing his valuable time to address this gathering and for highlighting the management of attack surface. Like, how do we go about, right? Yes, we are now aware of the basic approach to address the challenges thrown upon us. And we definitely have had the high level learning from the experience of other organizations. We are also highly grateful to the members of Bangalore Chapter ISACA, distinguished participants, and the learning guests for participating at this event. Mr. Sangamesh, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I want to say that we are most grateful to you all. We thank you for being with us from 5:30 p.m. for an extremely productive evening. Thank you all. It definitely was a great CP. Good night.
Thanks everyone. Have a
Thank you
great
so
weekend.
much.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks a lot. Same to you, Sangamesh. It was really good. Thanks, Rajesh.
Thank
You
you.
really did it so well.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, all of you. Good night.